Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. I'm Zach Ewing, joined today by Darcey, Koki Riley, and E. Scott Rabalais. A special edition for you today. It is our SEC Football Media Days preview. We're going to go through the Southeastern Conference 2024 comprehensively as best we can here, being that it's mid-July, but we made it. It's the unofficial end of the offseason is Monday when the SEC Media Days start. So we're going to talk about that from every which way, from the LSU angle, from Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, players we want to watch, and yes, we are going to make our early picks for who will be in the SEC championship game 5 months from now. All of that and more on the LSU Sports Insider Podcast right after this break.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets, already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
All right, you're watching the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. This is our SEC Football Media Days preview edition. And look, first of all, subscribe to the channel. It's a good time to do it. We're going to start putting training camp highlight videos, those sorts of things up on the LSU Sports at the Advocate YouTube channel. And, of course, lots more LSU sports, LSU football content to come as well. So hit the subscribe button, like if you like the content, and also follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. With that said, gentlemen, we're going to start today with some LSU sports headlines, as we always do. We will get into Media Day shortly, but I think right now the number one headline in the school sports is probably Paul Skenes, Koki. 7 no-hit innings today. Just left the game before we started recording. Had 11 strikeouts. The Pirates took him out at 99 pitches, but just continues to have a phenomenal rookie season.
Yeah, I mean, with Paul Skenes, he's just been unbelievable this season, and he has lived up to all of our expectations and more over in Major League Baseball. And I think the addition of that splinter pitch, that splitter sinker sort of combo pitch, that's around 94, 95 miles an hour. That's a pitch he didn't even have when he was here at LSU, and it's a pitch he's added over the course of this past year, and now he adds that to the 100 mile per hour fastball, to the curveball he's recently brought in, to the slider that we already knew he was great at, and you add all that stuff, and with it combined with his ability to command all his pitches, and it's just impossible for hitters to catch up. And you saw that today with the Brewers, that's a first place team in the NL Central. That's a team that has 2 starters in the All-Star game, and he's just dominating them, blowing them away. I think there was a stat that I saw just before we got on air where he is one of only 2 pitchers in Major League history, at least from what I saw on Twitter, to have 11 or more strikeouts and 2 no-hit starts in the same in a single season. So it's really unbelievable. It's him and Nolan Ryan, and that's it.
And if you saw it on Twitter, it must be true. No, I think that is true. Rab, this is like, I mean, when he came to LSU from Air Force, you kind of think, okay, well, he's going up to a much higher level of ball in the SEC. Can he do the same thing? He did better than anyone could have anticipated. Now he goes to the major leagues. Well, can he keep it up at the highest level there is? And again, he's doing better than anyone could have foreseen. I mean, this is really unbelievable.
It's hard to find a comp, for a meteoric rise. Certainly someone that we're familiar with. I mean, you remember Ben McDonald was the number 1 overall draft pick back in the late 80s, but he had seemed like more of a traditional path to the majors. But getting there so quickly, they couldn't keep him down. And the Pirates have. It looks like they've tried. They've tried to be judicious with him and maybe overly cautious, but his talent and the results just have been something that you couldn't keep out of the majors, and now he's already there, and he's going to be in the All-Star game. I've heard that he's the first Pirates pitcher ever to go to the All-Star game as a rookie, so that goes back to the 1930s. And we were talking before we started, it's just kind of the way things shape up, or work out for pitchers who pitched and how much rest they need. But pitching on a Thursday gives them 4 days rest before the All-Star game next Tuesday in Arlington, and he could be the starter. I mean, he's got an ERA now under 2. Coke, right? You said
1.9 ERA and
shameless plug time, by the way, folks. Next week we'll be at SEC Media Days, and Koki is going to be also there covering the All-Star game for us. So while we're in Dallas,
that's right, because the SEC Media Days are in Dallas, which is weird. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I was going to say though, whether you say, okay, Skenes hasn't pitched the whole season, he doesn't really deserve to be the All-Star game starter. The Cy Young favorite in the NL right now is Zach Wheeler of Philadelphia, but he left his last start. I don't think it was a serious injury, but there's some kind of nagging injury. He may not even pitch in Texas. And Reed, I ask you because you're probably the least of a baseball fan among us here.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
But this, and I'm not saying that to tease, but I mean, you still have to get excited about Paul Skenes. And yeah, you have the LSU angle, but this is the type of guy who can bring eyeballs to that All-Star game if they choose to start him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of LSU fans are watching Pirates games, as best they can, just to see Paul Skenes starts. And I'd imagine it's still fresh, it's still new, like you said. They pulled him right before we started recording. I'd imagine some fans are kind of upset that they pulled him, right before the 8th inning, but while he had a no-hitter. But Koki and I were talking, you got to play it safe. It's better to be cautious. Better to keep him, under maybe 110, 115 pitches, like you were saying. Yeah. So it's I'm sure a lot of LSU fans were, kind of frustrated that they didn't give him a chance to finish out the no hitter. But again, you see him work. It's unbelievable. We watched him pitch last year, and I remember I was in the press box sitting next to Koki. I'm like, so why can't he pitch in the majors tomorrow? What if you just dropped him in the majors? How would he do? And you were like, I don't know, we'll see. But he was ready then. He's ready now.
Maybe he could have.
Cool. And he's people have talked about Steven Strasburg, right? How he started, as a player. But I'm reminded of guys who are more of a sensation coming out as rookies. Fernando Valenzuela, Mark the Bird Fidrich with the Detroit Tigers back in the 70s.
Also had an awesome mustache, just like
he
Skenes
did. Yes, he certainly did. And of course, he was a little nuts. He talked to the ball, and
wore big bird costumes and stuff. Right?
He was a little nut. Paul is more straight laced, but you add the Olivia Dunn factor, that's his girlfriend, and the LSU gymnast, and she's got so much notoriety. It's kind of a intoxicating mix, people are just they want to know what's he doing, how's he doing, and I don't think just LSU fans or Pittsburgh Pirates fans, but a lot of people around the country who follow baseball, even on a marginal level, want to see what he's doing.
By the way, we talk about he's going to be the Rookie of the Year, assuming he stays healthy. He's going to play in the All-Star game. His Cy Young Award odds dropped from 25 to 1 to 14 to 1 after today. So he's going to be in that conversation as well. We could do a whole Paul Skenes pod. Maybe we should later in the fall, but we do have SEC Media Days to get to. So moving on with our headlines, Koki, what else is going on with LSU baseball? Yeah,
more transfers, more guys coming in, a couple guys entering the portal as well, like a Thatcher Herter or Justin Lohr, but those guys were probably going to get drafted anyway. So I don't think that's necessarily the biggest news. But late last night, they added Anthony Eanson, who was on the U.S. Collegiate National Team, one of 2 guys they've added from the U.S. Collegiate National Team since I've been on this podcast. So Eanson's a right-handed pitcher from UC San Diego. Can get up to 97 with a fastball, more of a mid-90s fastball. Is a really good slider. And then Daniel Dickinson, who was a middle infielder, third base type, was also on the U.S. national team this summer. That's a guy who can solve their potential problem at third base. Can also play in the middle infield. Has mostly played second, but has played plenty at short and third as well. He's also potentially a high draft pick in next year's draft in 2025. Eanson's the same way. When you play on the U.S. national team, that's kind of you're probably going to be a high draft pick at some point. So those are 2 really big additions. And then they added Connor Beignet, who's a right-handed reliever from Dallas Baptist, and they also added Dalton Beck, who's a veteran bat, left-handed hitter, more of a DH type, corner outfield type. He also has some experience as a left-handed pitcher. So they've been busy and going ahead and adding guys in the transfer portal. They've had 7 right-handed pitchers from the portal this offseason, which is a huge amount. And there's still a lot of questions to be had still with this team because the draft's coming up during the same time as SEC Media Days and as the All-Star game and All-Star Week.
Of course.
So I'm going to be busy. That's all it means.
We've been in hibernation for 2 weeks, and then everything happens at once. That's how it works in this business. Rab, the other thing, we have a finalized list of LSU players, LSU athletes, current and former, who will be heading with you to Paris for the Olympics.
Yeah, 33 athletes currently from LSU or who have been at LSU in the past, plus Jose Alvarado, the point guard for the Pelicans, who's going to play for Puerto Rico, and a trampoliner. I can't say his first name. Shostak is his last name, from Lafayette. So 35 and all. There were only like 21 athletes who went to Tokyo with Louisiana ties. So It's a large group and a lot of legitimate medal contenders. Obviously, Mondo Duplantis and Sha'Carri Richardson, the beach volleyball duo Kristen Nuss and Taryn Cloth. Javon Harrison made the team, even though he didn't make the top 3 in the U.S. trials, but he had reached the U.S. the Olympic qualifying standard this season. So he's going along with Aaliyah Hobbs. She's going to be a relay person, and Maggie McNeil, the swimmer representing Canada, who I know Perrin Keyes, our former sports editor, will be watching closely. She's trying to become the first woman ever to win the 100-meter butterfly in back-to-back Olympics. So a lot of exciting things going on with the Olympics, and a lot of people to follow. Some of them won't get out of the preliminary rounds, but it's still you still can call yourself an Olympian, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, exciting times. And we did a whole podcast on that with Rab and Sheldon last week. So check that out on the LSU Sports at the Advocate YouTube channel and subscribe while you're at it. And hit the like button while you're like right now. Just click the like button. It's right there. You can do that and share with your friends. Now, the main topic of today is SEC Football Media Days. So let's dig into it, guys. First of all, as I mentioned, they're in Dallas, which is a little weird. You think of Dallas as like the Southwest, not the Southeast. But with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, Reed, I guess this is sort of the SEC's way of rolling out the welcome mat for its new additions. Yeah,
and they're going to be showing off Texas and Oklahoma as the brand new members of the SEC. The media days have moved around a little bit in recent years as far as...
It's kind of like the NFL draft. They've made an effort to move it around after being in Birmingham for so many years.
Yeah, so they went from Atlanta to Nashville and now to Dallas, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll be going to Dallas, and LSU is sending Garrett Nussmeier, Mason Taylor, and Harold Perkins. Those are 3 players that LSU is going to be sending alongside Brian Kelly to sort of talk. And so it's going to be interesting to see them talk, see what they have to say, but it's also going to be interesting to hear from some of the other coaches, especially Steve Sarkisian from Texas and Brent Venables from Oklahoma, and just see, what they have to say about the new look SEC, then, all the changes that are coming to college football, not only this season, but beyond as well. So it should be an interesting week.
Yeah. Rab, I will say the SEC, as it seeks to remain on top of the college football world, and Greg Sankey deserves a lot of credit for this. They've just found a way to be adaptable and to continue to add strategically, and really have not added brands that have hurt the SEC. And Texas and Oklahoma, just the latest, and just kind of striking the right balance of Texas is not bigger than this league, Oklahoma is not bigger than this league, but yeah, we're going to have SEC Media Days in Dallas. This is part of our footprint now, and just kind of you see all this chaos around college football, and the SEC has just sort of responsibly expanded its bubble.
Yeah, and I've said this before. I like the fact, maybe it appeals to my geographic sensibilities, but I like the fact that as the SEC has expanded, they've expanded into with schools that still are in states that are contiguous with all the other states. I mean, obviously, they had Texas A&M already, but Oklahoma, is it's not like they're stretching from coast to coast like we're seeing now with the Big Ten with teams from Stanford and USC to Rutgers and the ACC. Stanford's in the ACC. Excuse me. Yeah. Let's say USC and Rutgers, and then Stanford's in the ACC, and the Big 12 has already been kind of all over the place, just trying to survive. And of course, obviously, the Pac-12 is out of commission. What conference is your alma mater in now? Arizona State.
They're now in the Big 12.
They are now in the Big 12. Okay, all right. Well,
traditional rivalries of Arizona State, Iowa State, and Cal, Georgia Tech.
Right.
Yeah.
But
conference rivalries.
It's going to be weird.
I think the SEC has been judicious about it. I mean, expansion. To me, 16's more than enough teams. It's gonna be a really hard. If you win the SEC in this league now, you'll have done something. National championship or not, you're going to be very proud of hoisting that trophy. So the SEC is kind of. I think kind of kowtowing to Texas, and Oklahoma to a lesser degree by having media days in Dallas. But it seemed like a natural progression that they were going to move it, have it in that part of the world. And now there's a bigger part of the SEC world. I'm not too surprised that we're heading there. But it's a big deal, and the SEC has handled. It seems like every other conference. Like I said, the Big 12 just did what they had to do to survive. But it seems like the ACC and the Big 10 have kind of been a little manic about it. The SEC seems to have been a little more judicious, and you hear talk occasionally about, well, does Florida State want to get out of the ACC and join the SEC? Does North Carolina and Duke, could they possibly want to join? And the SEC is Clemson, maybe, and the SEC is kind of like biding its time and like just picking the very best teams. They didn't add North Texas and Southern Miss, not to pick on anybody like that. They've added, or Oklahoma State. They added Texas and Oklahoma, and it's a pretty impressive cast of characters now in the SEC.
Koki, it is going to be strange to see Sooners and Longhorns in the SEC. But that, we put together a list of what to watch for at media days, and that's top of the list. I think, as Rab put it, can the what do you say? Can the 10-gallon Texas hat with Longhorns fit through the door? Or
that's right.
Yeah,
big head.
I guess that's the first thing to look for. But what else are you looking for at media days?
Yeah. Just in terms of what to watch for, like I sort of threw this out there, but like I think Bobby Petrino going back to Arkansas is just like one of the strangest things and one of the strangest storylines I've seen since I've started covering college sports. This is a guy who was basically kicked out the door at Arkansas for things of his own doing, and then years later, after a couple of coaching gigs and a short stint at Texas A&M as their offensive coordinator, oddly enough, and now he's going to get the keys to the car again at Arkansas, but this time, or the motorcycle. Back at Arkansas and as the OC, and I think he'll have more. I think he's going to have more of an imprint on offense than he did at Texas A&M, where obviously he was there at A&M, but I don't think he really was able to put in his footprint into that offense because of what the amount of control that Jimbo Fisher liked to have with his offense. So I think that's going to be interesting to see, like, on the field, but then off the field, just like, to me, it's like an obvious storyline that's now become underrated because of all the other changes in the SEC and because of Arkansas's general standing in the standings.
No, I like that. I think that's kind of an underrated one, especially, if Sam Pittman does not survive the season at Arkansas, which at this point may be more likely than not, does Bobby Petrino get a chance to be a head coach in the SEC again next year? I mean, you would think he could be a candidate for that job. Reed, what else you got stuff to watch for in Dallas?
Well, I mainly, focused more on an LSU perspective, and the first thing that came to mind was Harold Perkins. And we were all kind of surprised when we heard the news that LSU was sending Harold Perkins to SEC Media Days, because since he's been at LSU, in the 2+ years he's been at the school, we haven't seen or talked to him very much. He's been quiet. He hasn't said a whole lot, so we don't know a whole bunch about him and what his personality is like and who he is off the field and what he wants for himself and for his own career and how he sees himself fitting into the defense. It's going to be interesting this year because LSU wants, at least their plan right now, according to what Brian Kelly told our Wilson Alexander sometime in the offseason, that they're going to move him back to the middle, move him back into an off-ball kind of linebacker role, and we're going to see what that looks like. So I'm curious to see exactly what Harold Perkins says, what he thinks about his fit inside the LSU defense, what he thinks about the position change and everything, all the movement that, went into his role last year and what he wants for himself, beyond this season and how he sees himself maybe translating to the NFL. Because he's really kind of like an enigma. We don't know a whole lot about him. So it's going to be interesting to sort of get a chance to talk to him for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, LSU, let's dive into that discussion now, because they are they the first team on Monday? I mean, they're kicking off SEC Media Days, the very first out of 16 teams. And the three players they're bringing are Garrett Nussmeier, Mason Taylor, and Harold Perkins. And so you have two offensive guys, one defensive guy. And I know that's appropriate. Their offense obviously is much better than their defense last year, but I think it is probably the question of how good LSU can be this year, Rab, is how good can that defense be in year one under Blake Baker, a new coordinator, a new coaching staff? Will they use Harold Perkins differently? I mean, to me, that's the obvious line of questioning here with LSU.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can get Harold to give some insights. Obviously, he's going to say good things about the new defense and how they progressed during the spring and how they've done over the summer. But Garrett Nussmeier obviously is a huge part of it, how he replaces Jaden Daniels. But Harold Perkins is the poster child of this defense and the problems and the promise that this defense has had. Last year, he started the Florida State game inside, and he had 5 tackles, but he seemed like a non-factor. Then they kind of moved him more back outside, and he became more of a factor. Certainly, he kind of saved their season with an interception at Missouri that stopped a drive, and then they scored, and they ended up winning that game. It turned out to be arguably LSU's best win of 2023. But they've got to be better, obviously, and he's got to be more effective, and they go hand in hand. And if they can be, you just get a sense, I do anyway, that if the defense can be decent, middle of the road, like I used to say about LSU's passing offense, back in the day under Les Miles, if they could just be middle of the pack, 60th in the country, okay, 55th in the country in total defense, something like that, then you still figure the offense, which you can't expect them to lead the nation in scoring and total offense again, but you expect them to be still pretty good, pretty effective, a top 20 offense, let's say. If you can have that, then you can have a team that can be in the college football playoff, and that's what this is all about. So he is, as much or more so than Nussmeier, in my opinion, a huge factor and a huge example of where LSU has to be better this year.
Isn't it funny, because I host the Saints Insider podcast as well. 10 years ago, when Drew Brees' heyday, it was like, if the Saints could just have an average defense, and if LSU could just have an average offense, these teams would be championship contenders. And now we've like flipped the script here, and it's the other way around. The Saints need the offense, LSU needs the defense. Let's talk about Garrett Nussmeier, though, Koki. This, obviously has shown a lot of promise in sort of spot duty filling in for Jaden Daniels over the past couple of seasons, including the bowl game victory over Wisconsin in January. Now we find out if he's kind of ready for the spotlight all on his own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he is, as much as someone who doesn't have as much experience as you typically like from a starting quarterback to have, can be ready for a situation like this, right? We've seen him in spot starts. We've seen him play in the SEC championship game against against the best team in the country that season. We've seen him make, I wouldn't say all the throws, but a lot of them, and he has an NFL arm. And I think he's always had the most talented arm on the team for arguably all 3 years he's been here. Now heading into his 4th season actually with LSU, which is kind of wild. So like I don't know. I just feel like he seems like he's ready for this moment. Coach's kid can make more or less at least most of the throws. I'm just really curious to see how he sort of gels with his offense, because he has experience with a lot of these guys because he's been here for so long.
Yeah, and I mean, I think LSU fans ought to kind of appreciate how rare that is to have a quarterback be in your program for 4 seasons without having been the starter in any of those seasons. They brought Jaden Daniels in, he beat him out for the job, then Jaden Daniels came back for a second year. And Nuss has just kind of stayed, Koki, and now, I'm sorry, Reed. Mm-hmm. That's Koki, you're Reed. I do the same thing with the Saints guys. Nuss is stayed, and now he kind of gets rewarded with this great opportunity.
He could have easily transferred, right? And nobody really would have blamed him if he
no
did.
doubt.
A lot of quarterbacks transfer now. It's just the reality. But he chose to stay. He chose to ride it out. He chose to wait behind Jaden Daniels with the hope that he could come in and be the starter this year. That was always the promise. That was always what he's been looking for the last 2 years or so. In LSU, in the offseason, they didn't bring in a quarterback who would really compete for that job. They brought in A.J. Swan, a transfer from Vanderbilt, but he's expected to compete for the backup job. So Nussmeier is going into the whole season. He doesn't have to earn it. He doesn't have to go through a quarterback competition or anything. The job is his, and so he can focus on being the best starting quarterback that he can be. And it'll be interesting to see how he does that. One thing that I'm looking forward to at media days is just to get a sense of what the offense is going to look like without Jaden Daniels. How will it look different? Because obviously without Jaden Daniels, you lose that his ability to scramble. And so you have to come up with those rushing yards a different kind of way. So how is the offense going to look differently schematically? How is it going to operate? Are we going to see sort of different personnels, different schemes? Sort of trying to get a sense of what it'll look like is one thing that I'll be looking forward to in Dallas.
I mean, Jaden Daniels was your kind of get out of jail free card. A lot of times on offense, you'd have a 3rd and 9 rab, and defense would cover up whatever play you called, and then Daniels would just bust out and run for 14, and you'd get the first down and get new life. You're not going to have that this year.
No, and I think we saw that in the ReliaQuest poll against Wisconsin. A good defensive team, by the way, a top 20, top 25 defense. And there were some times in the game, and he's back there and he's waiting. He's waiting for a receiver to open up, and I'm like, he could take off and run here. And invariably, I don't think he ever did. Maybe one time. He was waiting for the third, the fourth receiver to open up, and I think it's more of what you got to see. He's mobile. He can move around. He's not like Zach Mettenberger was back in the day, back there just kind of a statue in the pocket. But he's certainly not Jaden Daniels. It would probably take him 8 years to run for 1,000 yards. In the LSU offense, I don't think we're going to see that. But we're going to see someone who can move around the pocket, and that counts for a lot in college football, just being able to get away from the initial pressure. And so I think we'll see that, but I think someone who's looking to throw, always looking to throw. And I think that'll be a little bit, so it'll be a lot different. Kind of in the Burrow vein, I want to go to I want to say something about his attitude. I remember we sat down and talked with him, he and I and Wilson Alexander, maybe one or two other reporters in Tampa before the game. And he wasn't cocky, but he certainly was like, I'm ready for this role. It's basically, I'm ready for this role. I've waited for it. It's my team now, and I'm going to show what I can do. And, of course, he led them on that great 98-yard drive to win the game late in the game. And I was going to ask Reed real quickly, you talked to him at the Manning Passing Academy. How much confidence does he exude? You want your quarterback to exude confidence. I was wondering how much he displayed that talking to reporters there.
I thought he exuded a lot of confidence. He sounded like a quarterback. He sounded like a starting quarterback, and he sounded like a veteran based on some of the things he was saying. You can sort of, when we were talking to players, we can sort of listen and kind of decode things and sort of find out, exactly where they're not, going to divulge any kind of information here, or where they're going to be more open with things. And he sort of had the playbook of, talking like a coach, of saying, I'm not going to give away too much about the offense. So he understands. He knows how to conduct himself, and he knows how to talk, and he knows how to communicate. And I think a lot of that comes from his father as well. His father's a football coach, Doug Nussmeier. He's coached all over the place in the NFL, CFL, all those kinds of things. So he looks, he sounds like a starting quarterback, and that comes, again, he doesn't have the playing experience or the starting experience, but he's been in this system for 4 years now, and he's been at LSU for 4 years now. So he is a veteran, even though he doesn't have the snaps and the starts to back that up.
So LSU will kick off SEC Media Days on Monday. They're the first team out of 16 to take their turn at the podium. It's 4 teams each day through Thursday?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yep. And we'll follow it all on LSU Sports Insider Podcast. These guys will have content for you. Check it out at theadvocate.com/LSU and or /sports/LSU, excuse me. And we're going to keep rolling here. Let's widen the scope a little bit, guys, from LSU back to the league writ large. Had you each predict a championship game as we sit here on July 10th, July 11th? Who you got, Reed, in your championship game?
I have Georgia and Ole Miss in my championship game. Ole Miss, I think, well, if we're going to talk about Georgia first, I think we all picked Georgia.
All of Georgia, yep.
Georgia, they're the best team in the conference, probably the best team in the country. I think so. They're probably the odds-on favorite to win the conference right now. I think you can pencil them in into the conference championship game. Ole Miss, on the other hand, the reason why that I put them in is a few reasons. Number one, a lot of returning production, especially a quarterback. Jackson Dart is coming back. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the conference already. So when you combine that with their transfers they brought in, according to On3, I'm looking at it here, they've got the number 3 transfer portal class in the country. So when you combine the returning production, especially a quarterback, the transfer class, and the schedule, it looks like they could finally. Ole Miss has never made the SEC championship game, so it looks like maybe this could be the year that they make it in. The schedule It's pretty light. The two hardest games are on the road at LSU and then at home against Georgia. They don't have to play Alabama this year. So that's sort of my reasoning in terms of picking, maybe they could finally get to that championship game. So that's where I went with it.
Not too much of a limb because Koki picked the same matchup, Georgia and Ole Miss. Koki, anything else to say about that, or maybe another team you may have considered putting in there?
I don't have a ton to add to that. I think Reed did a fantastic job of sort of breaking that down. I mean, it's not just the fact that they added a whole bunch of transfers again, because that's kind of just what they do now. It's the level of transfers that they brought in. When you bring in a guy like Princely U, I should say. I'm having a lot of trouble pronouncing his last name, from Florida, and then Walter Nolan, the transfer from Texas A&M. When you're bringing in guys of that caliber, like, that's what they needed. It's not just that they added pieces; they added pieces at places that of need, and they really elevated just the floor of talent they have on defense, and that was kind of their biggest issue. Combine that with the fact that they have so many returning players on offense and a pretty good coaching staff in general. Like, I just don't have a lot of. I don't have a lot of reasons to question them, and usually I'm kind of cautious on teams that like just totally build their teams through like purely through the transfer portal, or like remake their teams through the portal. But like Ole Miss this season, they're bringing back a lot of returning players, so like that sort of transfer portal effect, quote unquote, I don't think is quite as great heading into the season for them.
Come on, man, you cover college baseball. Transfer portal's where it's at. It's the only way to build a team.
Yeah, but I think there needs, at some point, we're going to have to find a way in college sport. There's going to have to be some sort of evening effect in college sports with this stuff, right? Because it's free agency. Like, do you want to build your basketball team purely, not your basketball team, that's a bad example, but like your baseball team or your football team through free agents?
We got to rein in the Wild West a little bit. I do agree with that. Rab, you also went with Georgia, and I'll just say a word for Georgia. Carson Beck coming back, like, it took kind of a perfect storm for Alabama to beat them in the SEC title game and keep them out of the playoff last year. That's not going to be a problem this year, because you could lose a game or even two and still be in that conversation. And man, when they lost that game, they looked possessed against, granted, a shell of a Florida State team in the Sugar Bowl, or I'm sorry, in the Orange Bowl. But I think we all agree Georgia's got a great chance to be there. But Rab, you had a different opponent for him.
Yeah, I know. First of all, I'd say about Georgia, they play a very tough schedule. I mean, they've got, I think they play Clemson, they go to Texas, they go to Alabama, they go to Ole Miss. It's tough. I mean, I will be surprised if they go into. I think they're going to be in the SEC championship game, but I will be surprised if they go in there undefeated. Yeah, but like you said, you can drop a game this year. I picked Texas, kind of grudgingly, but they did play in the college football playoff last year. Quinn Ewers is their quarterback is back. Obviously, they seem to have things on a roll. Talk about a school that's gone to the transfer portal and recruited well as well. So I wanted to say LSU, but I wanted Georgia versus LSU, but LSU's just got to answer so many questions. Will Nussmeier be good? Will the defense be better? Will the new coaches, pan out? There's so many questions. I think they could be a dark horse, but I don't think I couldn't quite pull the trigger on LSU. Texas, because they were in the college football playoff last year and lost that really close game in the Sugar Bowl to Washington. So,
if we eliminate the three teams y'all mentioned, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas, who's next most likely to get into the SEC title game? Is it LSU? Is it Alabama? Is it more of a surprise team of Texas A&M or Missouri, who had a good year last year? Who would you name after those three?
Well, I'm looking at my predicted standings, because part of what we were doing today is also predicting where LSU would finish in the conference. And number 4, I have Missouri. I just think that they might have. I don't know if they're definitely going to have the best offense in the conference, but it's top 3 at least, just because they're bringing back the quarterback Brady Cook. They're bringing back Luther Burden, and along with their other top two of their top three leading receivers from last season. I thought they did a pretty good job of reloading on the offensive line while bringing back a couple stars from last year's team. There's questions about their defense. I think that's the one thing that's really holding me from putting them in that, Georgia, Texas sort of tier. But I am very high on Missouri this season.
Don't they have another receiver named Blood?
Harold Blood.
Yeah,
yes.
that's quite a combo. Burden and Blood. I mean,
he's a transfer from Southern.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, do you guys agree with that? Do you have anybody else? Oklahoma was the other team I didn't mention that could come in and make some noise.
Yeah, I totally agree with Koki on Missouri, but I also want to throw out potentially Tennessee maybe. The main reason why I like them a lot this year is their quarterback, and it's tough to pronounce his last name right now, but it might not be in a few months. Nico Iamaleava. I think I did that pretty well.
Well done.
So
You sold it well.
Yeah. I said it with conviction. He's a former 5-star, sat out last year, so he's a redshirt freshman, I believe. He's got all the tools, a lot of mobility, a lot of length, a lot of height, good arm, and he started last year in Tennessee's win over Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. Looked great, won MVP, and now he's going to be the starter. I think his upside, his ceiling could be enough to bring Tennessee close to the top of the conference. But the main thing is, when I see the potential of him in that offense with Josh Heupel, we know he's capable of designing a good offense around a good quarterback. Then you look at the defense; they've got one of the best pass rushers in the country, James Pierce. So those two sort of foundational pieces I really like, and if they can build on that, I think that you could have maybe a surprise run to the conference title game. Wouldn't be totally shocked by it.
Yeah, and Josh Heupel can get the most out of his quarterbacks. We know that. So that kind of dovetails into our next discussion. Who will be better than expected? So if we're going to get a media poll as part of Media Days next week, and it's going to, Georgia's, I'm sure, going to be picked first, and then you're going to have
Vandy last.
Yeah, Vandy will be last, and then 2 through 15 will be a little bit more difficult to parse out. Texas will be up there. Ole Miss, we mentioned Missouri. At the bottom you have Mississippi State, South Carolina, probably Arkansas, and then LSU will be somewhere near the top. Texas A&M will be up there. I mean, it's going to be jumbled. But when all's said and done, and we look back in December at the media poll we get next week, who will we be like? How were they that low? Who is going to be better than we anticipate? And Reed, I'll start with you again. And the team you mentioned Tennessee. You just got done talking about, and also Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri, if I can add, a little something to that. I think the combination between Brady Cook and Luther Burden up there, one of the top, quarterback wide receiver duos in the country. And if you think, just what they're capable of and what they can accomplish, they were good on offense last year. They might even be better this year. They had a real solid year last year. So I think returning those two pieces, they can really build on that. They might be able to even take a step forward, especially if you factor in maybe some improvement on defense. So I really like Tennessee and Missouri are the two teams that really jumped out at me in terms of teams who are kind of underrated, teams who I could see making a run, getting to the top of the conference if things kind of break right with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Koki, you had your rankings, and you mentioned Missouri and then also Kentucky. If Missouri is picked 4th or 5th in the SEC and they're better than expected, then they're going to be pretty darn good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Missouri, I mean, again, you can argue the defense is going to be a bit of an issue, part of it because of what LSU did to their defense, and adding Blake Baker, their defensive coordinator, adding Kevin Peoples, their edge rushers coach, and those are two very important pieces of their team. Last season, they also lost quite a bit of talent to the NFL. But they still have a couple. I think they have like 4 or 5 returning starters still, and I don't know. I just sort of have confidence, some confidence that it's going to be good enough to where their offense is going to carry them to a lot of wins this season. Because again, it's going to be they probably have one of the 5 to 10 best offenses in the country. Just given that last year it was roughly a top 10 unit, and now they're bringing basically everyone back. But the other team that I picked was Kentucky, as you mentioned, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised doing the research last night. Like, they're bringing in a former 5-star quarterback in Brock Vandagriff. They have Chip Trayanum, the new running back who was at Ohio State and formerly at ASU, and they do a very good job picking their running backs at Kentucky. Their defensive line is stocked with NFL level guys, and I just think, if the offensive line improves, then they're going to be strong on the lines, and they have a talented quarterback. So I just feel like they're sort of a sneaky team in more of that middle of the pack area that could all of a sudden find their way at 8 or 9 wins if a couple things go right.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention on Missouri real quick, they probably have the easiest schedule in the SEC, at least among the contenders. They don't have to play LSU, they don't play Ole Miss, they don't play Georgia, they don't play Tennessee, they don't play Texas. They do have to go at Alabama, I believe, and play Oklahoma at home. But outside of those, I think they're at A&M,
Yeah.
But outside of those games, I mean, if those are your toughest games in this SEC, then that's very doable. Rab, you also chose Kentucky as your team that would be.
I
better
did.
than expected.
You mentioned Brock Vandegrift, the highly regarded quarterback transferred from Georgia. They returned 18 starters. Like I saw one prediction that had them like tied for 11th. Literally, I think it was Athlon, tied for 11th in the preseason SEC. So I think we're going to see them probably picked 10th or so like that in this 16-team league. But if you're looking for a school that might finish 5 or 6 spots higher than where they're picked in the preseason media poll, I think Kentucky could be your team. Kind of like Missouri last year. Now that comes with a little of a caveat, though. They fought hard to keep Mark Stoops as their coach, and they paid him more money. They got to start demanding a little more return on their investment at Kentucky. I think in football, as much as they care about football, never as much as basketball, but still. So I think if you're looking for a team that could finish several spots, I don't think they're going to be in the college football playoff. I don't think they're going to be in the SEC championship game. I don't think that's. I think that's above their ceiling, but they could be a team that finishes several spots higher than where they're picked in the preseason. Like Koki said, wind up with a 9-win season. You go, oh, they did pretty well.
Their ceiling is just higher than what most people would figure Kentucky's ceiling would be. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and then we can start arguments about whether it's a football school or a basketball school. Mark Stoops will start those all over again. I'll throw out one more, guys, that I think will be better than anticipated, and that's Texas A&M. Perennial underachievers. But I think Mike Elko might turn that around. He was kind of like an underwhelming hire when they made it, and people thought, oh, A&M had to settle for Mike Elko. To me, it's a little bit of the opposite of the Jimbo Fisher situation. He came in with much fanfare, recruited great, never really saw those results on the field outside of, was it the 2020 season? They had a pretty good team. This may be the opposite. Mike Elko can coach, and that roster is just littered with talent. I think they could be they could surprise some people and kind of push themselves into that upper echelon of the SEC. All right, flip it around. Who will be worse than expected? We'll call this the honorary Jimbo Fisher category because Texas A&M would have filled this role every year, since Fisher was there. But Reed, you've got Florida here, and it's going to be a tough one for ex-Raging Cajuns coach Billy Napier.
I hate to do this to Billy Napier, and I hate to do this to Florida because it feels like you're kicking them while they're already down. It feels like a lot of people are already low on Florida, so saying that they're going to be even worse than that, it's asking a lot, and it might be a little bit of a stretch for me. But the main reason that I chose Florida as a team that could underachieve is because I just see the possibility of just the bottom absolutely falling out. Because if you look at what their schedule is, I wrote it down right here. Starting October 12th, they go at Tennessee, then they're home Kentucky, home Georgia, at Texas, home LSU, home Ole Miss, and then at Florida State. So that is as difficult of a schedule as you're going to have anywhere in the country. And before that, their season opener is against Miami. That's not going to be an easy one to win. They also play Texas A&M, and they also play Mississippi State before that. So it's just a really difficult stretch for them to get through. They went 6-7 in Billy Napier's first year, 5-7 last year, not bowl eligible. So it's just, you feel for Billy Napier, but it's so tough to be able to get to 500 when you're playing a schedule like that. That was the main reason that I
legitimately like 8 or 9 top 20 teams on that schedule, which means if you're not a top 20 team yourself, you're not going to have a very good record. I mean, maybe you upset 1 or 2 of them, but that's tough. Koki, I'm going to come back to you because you had plenty of teams, but one of them was Alabama, and that's who Rab chose as worse than expected. And this is the storyline that we honestly haven't talked about yet that needs to be talked about. Nick Saban, for the first time, since he was, I guess, his blip in Miami, will not be part of SEC Media Days. He's gone from Alabama. Kalen DeBoer is the coach. And you see a step back, Rab.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Saban left LSU, and LSU's going into the 2005 season. Still a lot of talent on the team. You won't say, well, they don't have any players. Certainly they've recruited well. But I'm just talking about that Saban mystique, that little extra edge. It's what they used to say about Jack Nicklaus, if I may, or Tiger Woods, or applied to Tiger Woods too. He knows he's going to beat you. You know he's going to beat you, and he knows he's going to beat you. And that's what it was with Saban. you just knew he was going to find a way to win. How many times did they just pull out another one, and they pull out another one, and then hey, they're in the college football playoff again, or they're in the SEC championship game, or something like that. And obviously, I just think it's going to be hard for them to keep that going. Is Alabama going to fall off the face of the earth? No, I don't think so. Although, I can remember back in the early 2000s when they weren't very good, before they hired Nick Saban in 2007. But I just think that mystique is going to be gone with them. Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. He's certainly got it. Excellent winning percentage at a lot of small schools, beating a lot of small schools, but nonetheless. And he got Washington into the national championship game last year. So certainly, people can say, well, he did this, but
the
this
guy's
is
got
different.
like 9 losses in 6 years as a head coach.
Yeah,
or something like that.
It's a pretty stellar Saban-like record, but nobody's Nick Saban. And they've had Bear Bryant, they've had Nick Saban. Two coaches you could say are 1 and 1A in college football history as the best college coach. Nick Saban is the best college football coach ever. You're not going to have that again at LSU. It's like when they say, if someone says, well, Jay Johnson's not. He's not Skip Bertman. Well, that's okay. No one else is either. No kidding. So, or Paul Maneri wasn't. Well, yeah, that's true. And that's the boat Kalen DeBoer finds him in. I don't really want to ask this question because it would just be showboating, but there's a part of me who wants to stand up at media days on their day and say, why did you take this job? Why? What do you realize what you're doing? Alabama is my team to fall back a little bit, and for Alabama that means maybe not making the college football playoff.
We all like going viral, so there's a beer with your name on it, and I'll take you out if you stand up and do that in Dallas. Koki, you mentioned Alabama as well, but you also picked on the newcomers Texas and Oklahoma as teams that would be worse than expected.
Yeah, part of it's just a reaction to what I'm seeing, what other people think these teams are going to do. So, like, a lot of people are picking Texas to make the SEC championship game or Texas to be a top 4 team again. I just don't think they quite have the roster to be a top 4 team again. With Texas, I'll get to Alabama eventually, but with Texas in particular, I like Quinn Ewers. I think he's good. I don't know how much more ceiling there is necessarily there, especially with a lot of the stuff. I have some questions about how he processes the game. He's still pretty raw quarterback, raw player. Their offensive line's great, but the fact that they have to retool their entire receiving core, they lost a lot of weapons to the NFL, and I kind of worry about can they. I don't think they quite had that talent as they did last season. And then defensively, a lot of their defense was built on their defensive line. Their defensive line was spectacular, covered up a lot of the holes in their secondary, and they just don't have that level of talent anymore because they lost a lot of guys to the NFL again. So they did a nice job in the transfer portal of just sort of covering up some holes. But I just don't think their national title level, it's just not a national title level of roster. It's not as talented as the team that we saw last season that almost tripped itself up against a weaker Big 12 schedule. So what's that going to look like now in the SEC with a slightly worse team? That's kind of how I view Texas, at least. With Oklahoma, I just don't think they have the level of talent that they've had in years past. I think they only have 2 returning starters on offense. Defensively, they're going to be pretty good, but again, do they have the SEC level of talent on that defensive line in particular? We'll see. And I just don't love the decision to go with Jackson Arnold when you already had a really great quarterback in Dylan Gabriel already in there, and just to sort of shove Gabriel out the door and send him to Oregon was just an odd decision to me. And then with Alabama, I agree with everything Rab says with Kalen DeBoer. He's no Nick Saban. No one's Nick Saban, and I think he's a great coach, and he was about as good as they could have done in terms of a hire. But at the same time, he's not Nick Saban, and I also have some roster questions with them. Like offensively, Jalen Milroe, he's really good, but I still have questions of whether he can be accurate enough of a quarterback to be as good as Jaden Daniels was this past season, which I feel like that's what people are sort of treating him as heading into this year. I just have some questions with that, and their receiving core has a lot of question marks, not a lot of production there, and I think defensively they're going to be excellent, but I just have some questions with the new coaching staff, with some of the offensive question marks that we saw last season that kind of transitions over to this year. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll add this on Oklahoma too. Brent Venables. could be a good head coach. He may have a little Dennis Allen syndrome though, where he's better as a coordinator. I don't know. He's got to prove it, right? He hasn't had that really good year as a head coach yet. So we'll see what Oklahoma does too. Moving on to players to watch as we continue our SEC football media days preview here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Reed, you guys each listed several when we kind of had our roundtable about this, so feel free to mention more. But I picked out Jalen Milroe for you, so you can kind of do a point counterpoint with Koki there.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's a perfect segue. I'm glad we sort of transitioned to that because, like you mentioned, there are questions with Milroe, and there are lots of holes in his game, and there's lots of improvement that he needs to do. But the way that I look at it is, what if he does make those improvements? Like, what if he does develop his downfield accuracy?
And they'll be fine.
And what if he develops, somewhat of, more intermediate accuracy? What if he improves? Maybe not to the level that Jaden Daniels did last year, but what if he just makes, a couple more strides, a little more improvements as a passer? Then you might be looking at the best player in the country and the guy who's going to win the Heisman. And what does that mean for Alabama's chances? In the SEC and in the playoff picture. So I think he's a guy with all the tools that he needs, but we haven't seen him put it all together, and I think he's capable of putting it together, and I think if he does, then you're looking at a really scary player and a really scary team that can win a lot of games next year. So I think he's a really interesting player to watch. I really think that, if it all comes together for him, then he could have a special season.
I think, too, we talk about Kalen DeBoer. The last two starting quarterbacks he had were Michael Penix in Washington.
Yes.
Had a phenomenal year, got drafted higher than anyone would have anticipated. And then at Fresno State was Jake Haener, who also got drafted higher than anyone anticipated, improved remarkably under Kalen DeBoer. So he's got a knack for coaching quarterbacks. And if he can coach Jalen Milroe up, then he could have that Jaden Daniels leap. And that's a scary thing, I think, for the rest of the SEC. I'll let you guys get, kind of crosstalk if you want to on players to watch. But Koki, I'm going to try to do as well as Reed did on the name. Nico Iamaleava. Mm-hmm. No, I didn't do it right.
Is that all right?
Nico Iamaleava.
We're sorry. We're regressing here.
I butchered that.
That's why I didn't make it my player to watch.
Tennessee quarterback Nico, Koki. What do you
call him? Nico.
I picked him as a player to watch because I think he's the guy who's going to determine how good Tennessee's season is this year. Because if he's great and he lives up to his potential or even exceeds it this season, then Tennessee might win 10 or 11 games and make the playoff. Like, their offense is going to be fantastic. They have a lot of returning starters on offense. The defensive line has some interesting pieces. I think their secondary is pretty flawed. But, outside of that, they have a pretty darn good team. But if he's not good or if he gets hurt, because that's one of the concerns with him, I mean, I think he came to school at 170, 160 pounds, something like that, and he's got to add on the weight or he's going to get destroyed out there. So I kind of worry about the injury potential with him. So if he gets hurt or if he doesn't perform up to that standard, then the Tennessee project sort of falls apart, because if the offense is an elite, it's hard for them to win games, right? Just given the way that Josh Heupel coaches the team, given the way that they recruit, given just the roster build of that team. So that's why I sort of picked him, because I just feel like he's just one of the most valuable players on either end of the spectrum in the SEC this season.
Iamaleava.
Iamaleava.
I'm looking at the pronunciation on the Tennessee website. Iamaleava. We're gonna have to practice that one. Okay. If he's as good as as Tennessee hopes he is anyway. Iamaleava. Mm-hmm. One guy that all three of you mentioned as a player to watch, and Rab will let you kind of take the floor on him. Luther Burden III, the Mizzou wide receiver.
Yeah, I just remember thinking going into that game when LSU played at Missouri last year. I said, I'm looking forward to seeing this guy play, and I just thought he was tremendous. He's got a big body. He's tall and rangy and can go up and get the ball. And 1,200 yards receiving last year. Averaged 14.1 yards a catch. Numbers that he could certainly match or surpass this year. As I said, Cook is coming back as their quarterback. So I was just really impressed with him. He's a player I would say I would stop to watch him play. If I'm just going around the dial and SEC football is on, or certainly if they're playing a big game. So part of a dynamic offense, as we've said. So one of the best offensive players in the SEC, and someone who could win the Biletnikoff Award. So I was just really taken by his physical ability, and I would I would like to see him play again. And he's an easier name to pronounce, Luther Burden.
LB3, as they say, and not like a burner, but a guy with a huge catch radius and like just really physical, hard to bring down.
Yes.
Gonna make catches in traffic, that sort of thing. So difficult.
Maybe LSU's defense made him look good that day.
Difficult
I don't
to
know,
defend,
but I
but-
was impressed.
He looked good against everybody last year, to be
He's
fair.
legit, and he's one of those new age slot guys who sort of operates from the slot, runs good routes, gets open, shallow depth of target, one of those guys. So he's legit. He'll go high in the NFL draft next year, assuming he stays healthy.
Yeah, I mean,
Length is impressive.
I think you look at Carson back at Georgia, you look at Will Campbell at LSU, and Luther Burden. That could be 3 of the top 5 NFL draft picks, guys, we've talked about here.
Another main name, speaking of type draft picks, the name I think that we should at least mention is Micah Williams, the edge rusher at Georgia. Like, he might be the number 1 overall pick in the draft.
That's probably 4 of your top 5 right there. Could be,
that could be 4 of your top 5 because, I mean, the SEC obviously has a long tradition of these, and Georgia in particular has a long tradition of these, just these incredible athletes on the edge, and he is just the next guy up, basically. So a lot of people are mocking this guy as a top 2 or 3 pick, and I think all the top picks, they're pretty much all SEC players. Like, there's Kelvin Banks at Texas, who's the other top tackle to go along with Will Campbell. You mentioned Carson Beck. We've mentioned Luther Burden. Like, if NFL scouts, there's going to be a lot of NFL scouts at these games this year, as there usually is.
Yeah, it's just look. We're not trying to sit here on the high and mighty SEC chair and look down at the other conferences, but the proof's kind of in the pudding. Like, this is the league right now. The Big Ten obviously worth watching. ACC, Big 12 are going to be interesting. The Big 12 is fascinating because you've got like 6 teams that could legitimately be considered the favorite in that conference. Fascinating, but the SEC is the creme de la creme. We all know that. And so, having said that, we're going to end with kind of a fun question here. Non-LSU division, and by the way, LSU's got plenty of games that are worth the price of admission, from USC to UCLA to a lot of their conference opponents, Ole Miss, Alabama, obviously. What non-LSU game are you looking forward to watching in the SEC? And Koki and Reed, you guys both had the same answer again, and that's maybe an SEC title game preview in Georgia versus Texas.
Yeah, so the first place my mind went actually was the place where I knew Rab would go. Texas.
I have Rab's answer too.
I knew which game he would pick. But,
Did you? I'm so transparent.
Yeah, so I went with Georgia, Texas, and Koki copied my homework again, like he has done this entire podcast. So
these were done independently, I swear.
I was gonna say that, and then he just okay.
So he's gonna copy me again.
Very smart. Very smart.
Anyway, so I just think I just want to see Texas, how they measure up. Georgia's the standard right now. They're the top of the conference. They're the team to beat. So how exactly ready is Texas for the SEC? How do they shape up? I think we're going to find out. That's about as well of a test they can get. And it happens relatively early in the season, if I'm not mistaken, kind of towards the middle of the season. So it's going to be good.
October 19th.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. So I'm curious to use it as a barometer for where Texas is in their first year in the SEC. Just sort of gauge where they are as a program.
I'm really going to miss the SEC on CBS Music, incidentally, just as a total aside.
Yeah.
But Koki, Georgia, Texas, did you consider anything else, or is that? I mean, that really is the headline.
Honestly, that was the one that jumped out to me the most, just from like a pure talent and intrigue standpoint. I thought about for like a split second Georgia, Alabama, and I'm like, we see that every year in the SEC championship game. Why am I going to pick that game? So I didn't pick it. So that's why I went with that. But in terms of like the pure storylines off the field, it's Texas A&M. You know, like that's the pick for the storylines. I think for on the field, I think Georgia, Texas is the pick.
Yeah, Texas beat Alabama last year in non-conference play. If they could then beat Georgia this year, like all of a sudden you've got to, not that you don't anyway, but they could really establish themselves as a title contender both in the SEC and in the college football playoff. Rab, but we got to end with this. Texas A&M is going to be loads of just hate-filled fun the Saturday after Thanksgiving.
There are lots of schools, obviously, that hate each other in the SEC, right? Alabama and Auburn, Ole Miss and Miss State, Florida, Georgia. But this is another level. I mean, Texas A&M, left the Big 12, ran away from the Big 12 to try to get away from Texas, right? They said, we're going to the SEC. We're better than you now. Look, we're in a better conference.
Refused to play them.
Here comes
Yeah.
Texas. Many years ago, Chris Everett Lloyd, Chris Everett Lloyd, the two great tennis player, was on Saturday Night Live. She was the host. Kind of bland, but nonetheless. And they did this skit where everywhere she went in the world, Martina Navratilova would show up. Because Martina, she was having a great career, and Martina showed up, and she would win all the Grand Slam tournaments. And no matter what she could do, she could get away. And that's kind of how it is. It's like, hi, Texas A&M. Hi, we're back. Here we go. And we're Big Brother. Don't forget it and everything. And it's like, and the game is in College Station. I mean, I just think that's even better because, like, Texas is coming to not just renew the rivalry, but to steal their thunder, and it's just from the pure hate. Anxiety. They didn't want Texas to come to the SEC. The SEC, they got everybody in a room and they're like, okay, everyone, we have to make this unanimous. Texas A&M, all right. And that was about, they were unanimous, but it was with clenched teeth. So nothing could be better. I hope it's they call Georgia Tech clean old fashioned hate. This is clean old fashioned hate on a different level.
This will not be clean. I don't think, especially with Texas A&M fans. I'm joking, but I'm looking at SeatGeek and some of the ticket prices. Missouri at Texas A&M, which is a good game, $67, cheapest ticket. Texas A&M at Mississippi State. Let's find another home game. LSU at Texas A&M, another good game, $125. New Mexico State at Texas A&M, you can get in the house for $24. What do you guys think? Texas at Texas A&M, just the cheapest seat to get in on November the 30th.
$50.
$375.
$597. Wow. $597 plus fees is your cheapest ticket already, and that's just if they happen to have good seasons. That number's going into four figures.
Yeah, it might be too. I think Koki, you said you think they could be better than a lot of people think this year.
I said A&M.
Oh, you said A&M. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I think they could be good though.
Yeah, I mean, it could be two fairly highly ranked teams or similarly ranked teams.
Even if they're 9-1 and 7-3 at that point,
but it wouldn't be a total shock to say the winner is getting in the college football playoff and the loser might be out. It's the last game of the season. Yeah. So
already, we sit here on July 11th. It costs $600 plus just to get a seat, and the worst seat in the house. For that game. So I like that one a lot. All right, guys, we've gone along. SEC Media Days start Monday. They go on for 4 days. All the coverage at theadvocate.com/sports/LSU. We'll also be back with more LSU Sports Insider podcasts throughout the month. We'll have Wilson Alexander join us soon, and we'll be into fall camp. As I always laugh at fall camp, as it'll be 97 degrees the first day out there. But August camp. We'll call it August camp. And we'll be off and rolling. Rab will be in Paris, but he'll come back to the heat and he'll join us too. For our producer, Amelia Cotton, Scott Rabalais, Koki Riley, and Reed Darcey, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching our SEC Media Days preview, and we'll catch you next time.